So without further ado, please give a warm welcome to John Shuchart.
Okay, lesson number one, never applaud until you hear the speaker, because I could be terrible. Okay, the other thing I've always wanted to do in a synagogue was this. Get up, come on. Okay. And then I've always wanted to do this. Sit down. Okay, now for the rest of the presentation, my name is Rabbi John. For the next 45 minutes or so until I get yanked off stage, we're going to talk about mental illness. We're going to talk about the number one thing that has to change, and that's the stigma. Until the stigma is reduced, mental illness and the misperception and all the issues that are surrounded will persist. And I'm going to tell you how to end the stigma. We're going to talk about how other stigmas have been ended and how you and I need to end and do our part to end this particular stigma. But before I do that, Forbes magazine had a survey years ago where they asked CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies what their number one fear was. What do you think it was? Anybody guess? What's the number one fear that CEOs in this country have right now? Anybody? What?
Public speaking.
Public speak? What'd you do? Read my speech? I'm not calling on you anymore. Not the economy, not Donald Trump. Rather, public speaking is their number one fear. And these are the people that lead the top companies in our country. They get scared to death to do public speaking. Does anybody out there now want to trade places with me? Most people are scared to death to stand up in front of a crowd, okay? So I knew that, and when I read that study, I said, I better take a course on public speaking. So I went to a junior college. I live in Kansas City, and I went there, and for $250, they told me, be good. They said, now, if you can't be good, at least be funny. Now, if you can't be good and you can't be funny, for $250 I paid this, be brief. So in conclusion, I want to thank you all for inviting me today to talk to you. My favorite comedian besides myself is Will Rogers. And he said something we all need to remember. Everything is funny as long as it isn't happening to you. Do you ever laugh when a waiter has a bunch of glasses and he drops them? Do you ever laugh when somebody's running to get in the elevator and it closes and you say, too bad? We laugh and love other people's misfortunes. Humor is so important in our lives, but it's so hard sometimes to laugh and smile and be funny when you're not feeling good. Probably the best at humor ever is Southwest Airlines. Do you know that Southwest Airlines, one of their major aspects of hiring someone is their sense of humor? Have you ever been on a Southwest Airlines flight when you sit down and the lady says, here's the buckle, and she'll say something like, for you morons that walked here today and don't know how to buckle this, and all of a sudden everybody looks up, don't they? Go on a United Airlines flight, nobody looks up. If the plane goes down, you're dead. You have no idea where the exits are, you don't know anything. But with Southwest Airlines, you look and you watch and you pay attention because they're funny. And when someone says something funny once, you pay strict attention because you're hoping they're going to say something else that's funny. Studies have shown that humor attached to a serious subject is the most effective way for people to remember it. Now, originally, we thought that wasn't true, that if I told you something funny, you'd only think about what the joke was, you wouldn't remember what it was tied to. But studies have showed just the opposite. And Southwest Airlines has proven it. There's nothing more serious than taking people 30,000 feet up in the air. but you can use humor to get their attention, change the whole paradigm of the flight. That's how important humor is. Humor works. There's no doubt about it. So I told you that studies have shown that people retain more with humor, and laughing feels good. Physically, endorphins are released. Endorphins are like morphine in the body. Try smiling, you feel better. Try frowning, you don't. Try doing both at the same time, it's impossible. So you can't smile and frown at the same time. So smiling releases chemicals in our bodies. You don't have to laugh, you don't have to chuckle, just smile. Let me tell you about my story. I'm a cancer survivor. I am proud of it. I tell everybody I meet that I am a cancer survivor. I am not ashamed to talk about it. But I'm also a mental illness survivor. I'm not only proud to say it, I'm not ashamed to talk about it. But why are so many others ashamed to talk about the fact they have a mental illness, that they're so embarrassed? Why does that happen? Well, it's plain and simple. It's the stigma that's attached to mental illness. And because of that stigma, a lot of horrible things happen, which we're going to talk about. What's the definition of a stigma? Well, there's a lot of definitions. Here's one. It's a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. The stigma of a mental disorder. You know, it's easy for me to tell you that I have cancer because we've ended the stigma associated with cancer. I remember when I was 8 years old, my Aunt Sarah had breast cancer, and my mother said, Aunt Sarah has breast cancer. And then she said something else I'll never forget. She said, shh, don't tell anybody. Now, when you're 8 years old and they say don't tell anybody right away, there's something wrong, isn't there? Some shame, some horrible thing. So how did we end the stigma associated with cancer? You know, the C word was the worst word in the world. People thought you could catch it. It was like leprosy. And we also thought it was your fault. Now, my particular cancer, there's no way on earth I did anything to get it. It wasn't lung cancer. I didn't smoke to get it. My particular cancer, there's no way I did anything wrong. It's not my fault that I got the cancer. But what's happened with cancer is two things. Number one, the stigma ended by speaking out. My Aunt Bertha stood up and said, guess what? I got cancer and I'm going to be okay. That's the first thing that has to happen to end the stigma. The victims have to stand up and say, I got this thing, but I'm going to be okay. The second thing that happens is the people that don't have it have to become educated. People have to learn about cancer, that it's not leprosy, it's not contagious, you won't get it from me. And when those two things happen, when I start giving out vibes, I'm okay, you get those vibes. If I give up vibes, oh my God, I have cancer, you're going to get those vibes too, aren't you? So when I say, guess what, I'm a cancer survivor, you go, wow, that's good, how you feeling? And then when you learn more and more about it, guess what happens to that stigma? It gets reduced drastically. Another terrible disease where the stigma has been reduced is HIV and AIDS. It's nowhere near been reduced like cancer, but it's been reduced. How did it happen? It happened out here. You had a basketball player named Magic Johnson who happened to go to my alma mater, Michigan State. Magic Johnson stood up in front of the whole world and said, guess what? I'm HIV positive, but I'm okay, and I'm even going to play basketball. Charles Barkley, a great basketball player, said, I'm not going to play with you, because he wasn't very educated. And for a while, he didn't play with Magic Johnson. But you know, a year later, Magic Johnson was voted the most valuable player in the All-Star game. And now he's worth somewhere around $1 billion. He's healthier than I am, and he's doing just great. And so what happened with HIV is people started saying, I'm HIV positive, but guess what? I can manage it. I'm not going to die. Oh, and you're not going to catch it from me. Do you know, once upon a time, if I was HIV positive and had a cut, some of you would leave the room. especially if you had an open sore. Not anymore, because you know the chances of you contracting it are almost zero. So the stigma has been greatly reduced. And the second part is you became educated about what HIV is. So what's the history of ending a stigma? Two things have to happen. People that have the problem have to stand up and say, I'm going to be okay, I can manage this. We have to give off those kinds of vibes. And you, who don't have the problem, have to want to become educated. When those two things happen, the stigma gets reduced. What's the big deal anyway? Why do we care about mental illness? Let me give you some facts. Most of you know these. 1 in 4 adults experiences mental illness in any given year. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Wow. 1 out of 4 of you. That's a ton of people, isn't it? So why do we have to concern ourselves? Because it's so prevalent. More people now have a mental illness than cancer, than HIV. So that's the first reason. The cost of mental illness in this country is over $193 billion in lost earnings. And this is the part that bothers me the most. 60% of sufferers don't receive treatment. Not some, I should change that word to most, because of the stigma associated with mental illness. Teenagers, I'm a former school teacher. I've just created a program for middle school and high school kids where there's going to be an app on their phone, and it's going to help them understand mental illness, report mental illness, do a lot of things with this application. We're starting it in Kansas City in August, and then we're going to explode it all over the country. I love kids. They're the most important people we have, but they're suffering. Their numbers aren't quite as bad. Instead of 1 in 4, it's about 1 in 5 teens are suffering from a mental illness. Half of the mental illness, though, emerges by age 14 and 75% by the age of 24. So by age 24, we know 75% of the people that have a problem. And the worst is the suicide. In Kansas City, where I'm from, there's been at least 12 young people take their lives in the last, 14, 16, 18 months. That's an epidemic in a size of Kansas City. We've had copycats where one girl stood in front of a train and a week later a girlfriend of hers at the same school did the same thing. At another high school, within 10 days, we had 2 other kids take their lives. It's an epidemic. It has to stop. Depression, which I suffer from, is the most misunderstood mental illness, perhaps. Because people that don't have it tell me, snap out of it, Johnny. Let's go to a movie. Let's go have a drink. Let's snap out of it. Do you think I wouldn't snap out of it if I could? You think it's fun to be depressed? You know, everybody gets sad. Everybody in this room gets sad. And sadness is caused by situations and events. But my depression's a little bit different. My depression lasts longer than being sad. Depression, if we define it clinically, I understand depression lasts a minimum of 2 weeks. Can last 2 years, 5 years, but a minimum of 2 weeks. It's a lot different than just being sad. Many people claim it's a chemical imbalance in your brain. In my case, events can trigger a depression, but I know that my depression is due to biological chemical imbalances in my brain. How do I know that? Well, I know it for sure. I don't know it for sure, but I have a positive reaction to all those little pills, those antidepressants, which have been created to do what? Change the chemical imbalance in your brain. So if I take that little pill and I feel better, wow, I must have a chemical imbalance in my brain. Now, when we look at what causes my depression, here's how my mind is wired. Ugh, it's screwed up. It doesn't know where it's going. That's what your mind looks like, okay? What causes my depression? I look at things differently than you do. I can't help it, however. Here's a good example. We're really proud of the Kansas City Royals. I don't know if you followed them last year, but they are the most fun team in the world to watch. They're exciting, they love each other, they're jumping around like crazy, and they hadn't won a World Series in 30 years. Think how terrible they've been for 30 years. How do you get that bad for that long? You have to try. And they tried really hard. They lost over 100 games 6 years in a row. In Kansas City, we don't understand how they won any games for those 6 years. But the Royals, in 2014, went all the way to the World Series, had the tying run in the 7th game at third base with 2 outs. And Perez hit a pop-up to end the World Series. We could have won it. In 15, we did win it. But in 15, the Kansas City Royals started 7-0, and then they lost 2 games. And I was sitting with a friend, and I said, I'm going to rip up my season tickets. They're going to be as lousy now as they were the last 30 years. He said, are you crazy? They're 7-2. And he took out his phone and he Googled it and he said, this is the 3rd best start in the history of the Kansas City Royals, and you're going to rip up your season tickets? See how my brain looks at things? Now, I'm not always that pessimistic, but I look at things differently than other people do. The second example, things my parents said to me. These things stuck to my head. Parents are the most important people in our lives, and sometimes they don't think before they say things. In my case, my parents tried very hard to be wonderful, loving parents. They just didn't come close. They were the world's worst, okay? They did things to me, well, if you buy my book, you'll read it. They're unbelievable, some of the things that they did to me. Here's the first thing my mother said to me. I applied to college when I was 17, I guess. I applied to Tulane, Wisconsin, and Colorado. One Saturday in 1966, she walked in and I was watching television. I was watching Michigan State and Notre Dame play to a famous 10-10 tie. Anybody old enough to remember that? Nobody? You're not old enough. Anyway, she walks in and she says, you know, I've been thinking about this. You're not the brightest of my 4 sons. You're not going to get into any of those schools. She turned her head and she said, who's playing? And I said, Notre Dame and Michigan State. She said, well, since we're Jewish, Notre Dame is out. I want you to apply to Michigan State. I said, I'm going to get into those 3 schools. She said, I'm going to tell you again, you are not the brightest of my 4 sons. You're not getting in any of those schools. And I have a friend whose daughter goes to Michigan State, and she loves it. And I said, then she's an idiot also? And I should go to Michigan State? I won't bore you with the details, but I ended up going to Michigan State. But that's a whole other story. What bothered me the most when my mother said, you're not the brightest of my 4 sons, is at the time I had an older brother, and I had 2 younger brothers. I think they were 6 and 4. How did she know that the 6 and 4-year-old were brighter than me? That really hurt. I mean, you're really stupid when your mother says your 6 and 4-year-old are much smarter than you are. And so it stuck to my head. Hey, I'm not very bright. Now, she might have known something. And here's what happened. I ended up going to Michigan State, and at the end of the year, I came back in June, and my older brother was a year ahead of me. He came back, and we went bumming together on a Saturday, and we walked into the door. Oh, I got to tell you something about my father. We lived in a house where here was the rule. The only answer we were allowed to give to any question he asked were, yes, sir, no, excuse, sir. Raise your hand if you were raised in that kind of a home. Oh, you were. So you lived in Nazi Germany also. Okay. Let me tell you how bad it was. We had a curfew at 1 o'clock in high school. And I'll never forget one night my brother showed up about 1:30. My father was always asleep, but for some reason he was awake. And he heard the door, and he came running from wherever he was coming from, screaming, where have you been? You know your curfew's 1 o'clock. And my brother raised his arms, and it was caked in mud. He had a flat tire. And my father said, then you should have left where you were 30 minutes before, because you could have had a flat tire. My brother said, "You're crazy." And my brother didn't eat except for out of a straw for over a month because my father broke his jaw. So that's my father. So now, at the end of my first year and the end of my brother's second year, we're out bumming and we come home, we open the door, and we hear this voice. "Oh, boys, is that you?" And Steve turned to me and he said, "Did you drug him before we left? That can't be our father." "Oh, boys, is that you? Come on in." Who is this guy? We walk in, and my father, hopefully you can hear me, my father is sitting on the couch in his usual seat. You have usual seats? Like his tush is like impressed into, you can't sit in it because my tush didn't fit where his tush fit. He is sitting on the couch like this. And he looks like Ben Franklin. Well, he's not as smart. Well, I wish he had flown a kite and got electrocuted, but he didn't. So he's like this, and he's holding two pieces of paper. And he says, "By coincidence, your report cards both came today. Have a seat." Now, remember what my mother said. I'm not the brightest of the four sons, right? So where did I sit? Like an idiot, right in front of him. My brother, the genius, sat like in Jupiter. I don't know where he sat. But he couldn't even be seen or heard. So my father is going like this. Leans forward. 2.9. Oh my God. I jumped up and did a jig. I said, "I told you I was going to do good on these tests. I told you I wasn't the stupidest kid in this family. I told you I was smarter than a 6 and a 4-year-old. I studied my fanny off. That psych test, I told you I passed that psych test, and I'm jumping around. I'm just really mad that you all thought I was so stupid." And he goes, "Together, you got a 2.9. And Johnny, you got a 1.4. And so since you did, I know you'll never figure out what the genius over here got, so I'm going to tell you. He beat you. He got a 1.5. Then Hitler, my father, went berserk. Absolutely insane. If he could have killed us, he would have killed us. So the moral to the story is, I guess I'm not the brightest of my mother's four sons with a 1.4 average. Now, I got to tell you, I'm going to show you a picture. My wife, Stevie, and I have known each other since we were 4. Yeah, it's pretty scary, isn't it? Yeah. Wait a minute, that doesn't mean we liked each other since we were 4. I just said we knew each other since we were 4. When we were 7, we were at some carnival. Have you ever seen these cutouts like this? You know, you stick your head in. If you notice, I don't know if you can see in the picture, we're 7 and we don't have any front teeth. When we're 80, we're taking the exact same picture and we won't have any front teeth. The worst, my wife came to me. My mother and father didn't like my wife. You know, we dated since we were 4, and they decided that they didn't want us to go to the same college because then we might get married. And they didn't like her. They weren't too crazy about me either, remember? So they made us go to different schools. My wife was 7th in a high school class of about 400, and could have gone to any school in the world, but she picked Wisconsin because it was a good school and close to Michigan State, so we could come see each other. At the end of the year, when I had my 1.4, she said, well, if we want to be together, one of us has to transfer, and I don't think you could even transfer back into high school with a 1.4. So she said, I guess I'm going to have to transfer to Michigan State. And she said, you know, I also been thinking, I don't know that I want to marry a 1.4 kind of guy. So here's the rules. I'm going to transfer to Michigan State, and we are going to study Sunday night from 7 to 11:30 all the way through Thursday night. At 11:30, you're going to have a choice. We can go get something to eat, or we can go do something else. I lost 21 pounds that year, because I always pick. I won't tell you what the something else was, but that's what I picked. I never went to eat, ever. This is the worst thing ever that happened to me. One night we're at dinner. I was 12. I was going to be going to camp in about a month. We're at dinner, and my mother said, "Pass the salt." How much trouble can you get into? I passed her the salt, and she said, "That's your problem." What, did you want the pepper? What do you mean, that's my problem? This is 1962. There's no internet for you young people. There was a time where dinosaurs ruled the world, and there was no internet. 1962, she read someplace that if you're thinking out of the right side of your brain and you're doing everything right-handed, you're screwed for the rest of your life. You will always be the dumbest of my 4 sons. So what we're going to do is send you away. Instead of going to camp, you're going up east, and for 8 weeks, you're going to learn to do everything left-handed. My father, I'll never forget, said, "Really?" But my mother always won, and the next thing I know, alone, I'm on an airplane at 12 going up east from St. Louis, where we lived at the time. I thought everyone there was going to learn to be left-handed. When I got there, I'm 12, and this turns out to be a prestigious high school where the youngest person was probably 16 or 17, and I'm 12. And they were there for high school, for summer school. I'm there to learn how to do everything left-handed. Do you think I got teased a little bit? 6 o'clock every morning, they woke me up, took me to the tennis courts, tied my right hand behind my back, and made me play tennis left-handed. Now, there's an upside to this. I eventually, when I was 14, was ranked 6th in the city of St. Louis because I won every first set I ever played, because I didn't have a backhand. When someone would hit it over here, instead of having a backhand, I would just flip the racket. It took them a set to figure out where the hell to hit the ball. Thank you, Mom. I learned how to write left-handed. I learned how to eat left-handed. Everything I did was left-handed. They did make me take high school physics. I'm so stupid. I got a high school physics course and a high school English course. Obviously, I didn't do very well in either one of those. And I have to write left-handed the whole time. I can't even read my notes. So I came home, and I'll never forget, my mother got the report card from that summer. And she's sitting, and she's drinking a lot of vodka. And she said, "You know, I wasted a lot of money. I sent you there, you flunked English. You flunked physics." I said, "However, can you wipe your butt with your left hand?" Think about it. How many of you can do it? It's not easy. I can do it, okay? In 2000, I had a near-fatal car accident. Some moron decided to run a red light. I was making a legitimate left turn. He's coming up a hill, and he's lugging cement blocks. The cop said he was going 42 miles an hour, and he hit me flush. I wound up on the passenger side. The seatbelt broke. The airbags go off. The cabin fills with smoke. I don't know if I'm going to burn to death, but I'm not too crazy about that. Somehow, some way, I managed to break down a door and get out. There's about 30 or 40 people there that looked like they saw a ghost. They put me like a football player on one of those wooden blocks and tie you up, and they rushed me to the hospital, where for 6 hours I went through every kind of test you can think of, and they found absolutely nothing. I was fine. It was a miracle. I lost my cell phone and my sunglasses from the explosion. They flew out of the car. They never found them. And the guy's insurance company, I'll never forget, called me up, and he was aghast that I was alive. He said, "You know, people that are hit at 25 miles an hour, 92% die. You were hit at 42. Are you sure you're the guy that was in the car?" I said, "Yeah, I was in the car." He said, "What can we do for you?" Well, I lost my sunglasses and I lost my cell phone. Well, how much were they? $700. They were $300. $700. Okay, we'll get you a check right away. Like the next day, there's a check. Let me tell you some advice. If you're ever dealing with an insurance company, have an accident, and they send you a check, on the back of the check, there's no room to endorse it because they have 430,000 words. And all of them say, if you sign this, you're screwed, you idiot. Well, there was nothing wrong with me, so I signed it, and I got my $700. 2 years later, my shoulder started hurting. So I went to an orthopedic surgeon, and he said, wow, have you had any trauma or anything? I said, I'm married. He said, I usually don't say that when my wife's here. Sorry, honey. He said, no, like an accident or something like that. And I said, well, yeah, I had this stupid car accident, nothing happened. He said, tell me about it. So I told him, and he came back, he went out, he came back, and he had these little paper clip things. You've seen them, you shake them, and paper clips come up, they're magnetic holder. He said, this is your body. You went from point A to B to A so hard and so fast. I hate to tell you this, I hope you didn't sign anything from the insurance company, because this is not going to be the only operation you're ever going to have. I've had 17. 7 just on my left wrist. Let me tell you what happens when you have 17 operations. Let me tell you what happens when you have 7 on just your left wrist. The first operation, they do the operation, and they tell you you now have to go to physical therapy for about 6 weeks. Raise your hand if you've ever been to physical therapy. Okay, I know you'll agree when I tell you that these therapists do go to the Nazi school of therapy. Their only goal in life is to kill you, punish you, and make you cry. So for 5 or 6 weeks, I'm crying and punished. She's doing a great job. She's a perfect Nazi. And she says to me, it's not working. You're in pain. I said, that's because of you. And it's not working. She said, we have to go back to the surgeon. Don't ever go back to, what does a surgeon do? Yeah, I got an idiot to go back to the surgeon. He says, oh, I know what I did wrong. I can fix it. So I go back, and 5 or 6 weeks later, the Nazi is killing me, and she says again, it's not working. Anyway, by about the 4th time, I became hopeless. How do I know that the next time, the 5th time, the 6th time, the 7th time, that they're going to fix it? They're not going to fix it. I know they're not. I'm just going to be in pain. And then they started doing something else. They gave me little pills that put me on a different planet. Now, I didn't mind going to that planet, but I had to keep taking the pills to stay on the planet. And I got addicted to opioids. Name one: hydrocodone, oxycodone, Oxycontin, Nucynta. I have had them all. I was up to 6 a day just to be able to get through the day. And I still had another 10 operations I ended up going through, a hip and more shoulder operations and so forth. And one day I decided I wanted to end it. And so I'm a wimp. I went on the internet. I got to find the way to end it that would be the least painful way. Carbon monoxide poisoning. That would be the best way for me. But I didn't want to do it at home. And so I got in my car. And let me tell you what happens when you're in that state where you're about to take your life. Your mind isn't quite working right. I'm driving somewhere, and I think, oh, I forgot to pick up my prescription. I got to go get my prescription. But I got lost. Now, I've only gone to this place 1,000 times. It's a mile from my house, CVS. I got lost because I'm not thinking. And I wound up 2 miles away and turn around, and right in front of me, it's like God or somebody says, this is your day. There's a storage unit that looks like garages. Do they have them out here? Okay. had never even noticed them before. I should have just pulled in and ended it. But I had to go get my prescription. I don't know why. I found my way to the CVS, I got my prescription, and then I started to go back to the storage unit and forgot where it was. So I said, okay, I got to go home. I'm going to get on the internet and find out where this thing is. It's about 3 o'clock now. I get on the internet, and guess what? There's hundreds of these. Hundreds of these. So I call one up, and he says, I never forget, he said, this is your lucky day. He said, if you'll sign a 2-month contract, we'll give you the first month free. I'd have signed a lifetime contract. What do I care? But then I'm thinking, what if I call another one? What's that deal going to be? So I called another guy, and I told him the deal, and he said, I can beat that. I'll give you 6 months free. I called a third one, and I got like 8 months free. And then I started laughing hysterically. I'm about to end my life, and I'm worried about, I'm Jewish, but this is ridiculous. I'm worried about the price. I called my best friend up and I said, get over here. So he left work, he came rushing over, and he said, tell me about it. I said, well, here's the whole story. And he said, well, what was going to be your last meal? He said, don't you watch television? You have to have a last meal. Oh, well, I guess I would have gotten a Dairy Queen Blizzard with pecans because that's my favorite thing. And he said, would it have been a large? I said, no, I'll only get a medium. You idiot, why wouldn't you get a large? You're going to be dead in 5 minutes. And so he and I start laughing again. You know, you can't kill yourself if you're laughing. Those endorphins, remember, get released and you're starting to feel good. I didn't want to die, I just wanted to feel good. So he said, tell me some more of the crazy things in your life you've either done or what's happened. So I started telling him some of the stories about my mother and my father. He started laughing. What idiot gets their hand tied behind their back when they're 12 years old? He's laughing hysterically, and we just had a great time. And so I learned something very important. Traumatic events get stuck in your brain. If you can learn to reframe them, you can unstick them. Take a picture. Go home tonight. Any picture. If you have a black frame, put a white frame around it. I promise you the picture will look brand new. You'll go, whoa. But you didn't change the picture. You just changed the frame. You can do that with your experiences. You can reframe the experiences that you've been through. I've happened to have learned how to do it using humor. Sharing these events with a trusted friend is important. If you have something stuck to your head, sit down with a friend. Remember what Will Rogers said? Everything's funny as long as it's not happening to you. I guarantee you, if you share some of the things that have happened to you with a friend, they'll find something humorous in what's going on. Maybe you forgot to get your last supper before you killed yourself. Something humorous will happen. Humor helps, okay? We want to laugh. We want to feel good. It's not easy to laugh when you're feeling bad, but if you stop and try to reframe what's happening, things will happen in a positive way for you. It is really important that as you become sad, most people reach this point and they somehow can level off and then they go back up. People that get depressed keep falling into what I call the deep, dark hole of depression. There's been times where I have crawled up in a little ball, a little fetal position. It's horrible. The trick is don't fall into that deep, dark hole. The trick is to stop here like normal people do and somehow get yourself going sideways until you can go back up. The trick I use is to reframe what's going on. If the Royals lose 2 in a row, instead of tearing my season tickets up, I try to find some humor in that. Okay? I'll go back on the internet and say it's the 3rd best start in their history. I'll do something as these events are starting to make me sad, because I still get sad. My brain is still wired the way it's wired. But I've learned to stop, again, by reframing. And I'll call a friend and I'll say, help me reframe this, help me. Help me find some humor in what's going on. And every single time they seem to be able to find something that's funny. One of the other things, are there any physicians in the room? Okay, any caregivers? Anybody? Okay, caregivers, any clergy? Okay, well, one of the things that we all need to be pushing for, in my opinion, is screening for mental illness. Physicians currently screen for everything else, don't they? High blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, but they don't screen for depression. Is there not enough time? Do they not have enough knowledge? Why don't they screen for that when you go in and visit? Why don't they ask you about your mental illness, your mental state of mind? It's really important, because look what it would provide. It'd be an opportunity to start the discussion. It'd be an integration of the mental and physical care. It would reduce the stigma by broadening the conversation. It would enable the PCP to become a trusted advisor in your mental health. But before you screen, you got to know the right words. And I don't know if you've seen this before. It's hard to see on the screen. NAMI put this out. There's certain words you have to start learning to use. For example, you don't say he committed suicide. You say he took his life. Okay? That's a very important difference. One is an act, a terrible act of murder. The other is different. My older brother, by the way, did end up taking his life. He was 27 years old at the time, and I was 25. So I've learned to say he took his life. So if you don't have this sheet, get it from NAMI. There's a lot of words you need to start using instead of the words that you're using now. Okay? If you're a caregiver, I just want to make sure that you understand that you need to sustain your own compassion. You have to retain a healthy skepticism. You got to learn to let go. You got to remain optimistic. You have to be the solution, embrace discernment, practice sustainable self-care, and acknowledge your successes. Okay? I wrote a book. And let me tell you what we do at the book. We don't allow anybody to sell the book that's a reseller. I could sell millions of copies through Amazon or whatever, but we don't. We only sell it through nonprofits, and the nonprofits receive 30% of the proceeds. The rest of the proceeds, by the way, we don't charge to come here today. We pay our own expenses. So all the expenses go to the Shuchart Foundation for Mental Health Awareness to try to help us do more of this. Our goal is to speak 24/7. We talk to colleges all over the country, church groups, whatever, any group that'll have us. If there's 50 people or 500, we'll speak with them. Encourage you and ask you to consider buying the book, help NAMI, help our movement, help our foundation. I'll sign the books, we'll be outside at a table. They're $16.95. We also have an audio book. If you like my voice and you like to hear audio books, you can purchase an audio book for $14.95. I want to thank you very much for allowing me to come and share my story with you. And again, at the end of the day, the bottom line is this. The stigma has to end. If it doesn't, people will continue to take their lives. People will continue to stop taking their meds. I'm asked all the time, why does somebody who's feeling good on meds stop taking them? Well, let me tell you why. You don't have to raise your hand, but did anybody in this room take an aspirin in the last month for a headache? Not one person in this room would look at you in any negative way, would they? You took an aspirin. But when you took an aspirin, you know what you said? You said, I need help. I cannot handle this headache alone. I need an aspirin. What about the pills for mental illness? All the antidepressants. I'm feeling good. I'm on an antidepressant. Why would I possibly want to get off? Because of the stigma. Because I don't want to take those pills, because I don't want you to know I'm taking those pills. Because guess what? If I say raise your hand if you took an antidepressant today, some of you that did wouldn't raise your hand, because you don't want people to know because of the stigma. And so I want to get off those pills as fast as I can, because I know I'm on them, and I know what you're thinking, and I got to get off these pills. When the stigma ends, guess what? The pills will become like aspirins. I'll look at them the way I should. They're something that I need to help me. Right now, when we see a tragedy, you read it in the paper, every single time it says, John Doe, mentally ill, off his meds, shot 3 people. Every time, off his meds. We've got to end this stigma. We can save children. We can save adults. You can do your part. If you're suffering with a mental illness, stand up and tell people, I have a mental illness. Give off the vibe that you're okay, you can manage it. And if you don't have a mental illness, learn about it. Learn that it's not my fault. My brain was born, I was born with a squiggly line. You were born with a straight line. But I can manage my illness, and I do it with humor. Thank you so much for allowing me to come here today.